All right, everybody, welcome to Movies by McManus, the podcast where we talk about movies, comics, TV, books, all different types of media in the context of who created it and what effect it's trying to have on the world. So today we have a book. We have the 2015 book, Where the Bodies Were Buried by T.J. English, about Whitey Bulger. I'm your host, Greg. With me, as always, is my brother, Mike.
Hello. Thanks for being back with us.
Yes, thank you for being back. Thank you for sticking with the podcast. So I don't really know how much background I need to give on who Whitey Bulger is for people who, may not know as much about organized crime as maybe me and my brother do. He was basically the head of the Irish mob in Boston. He becomes kind of the leader of what's called the Winter Hill Gang, which is the Irish mob that kind of rivaled the Italian mob in Boston. And Whitey is kind of the boss of it. He becomes the boss in the late 70s, in 1978, and then continues to be the boss until the 1994 when he is indicted and he goes on the run. And he is on the run, and he's on the FBI most wanted list for 16 years before he's finally caught.
Well, he's actually goes on the run before,
or he goes
the
on the run.
Indictments came down, but he was basically tipped off, which we'll get into why. Yeah. He had basically a very cozy relationship with members of law enforcement who were protecting him and his gang, and he was basically it was made known to him through his connections in law enforcement that indictments were about to come down, so at which time he fled. We should also just mention he became the sort of boss of the Irish mob in the Winter Hill Gang because there were two warring factions. And why don't you speak to that a little bit?
We can talk about it. I want to bring up just mention so the official story of his connection to the FBI. Sure. The official story is that it was only two corrupt FBI agents, which is John Connolly, who is Whitey Bulger's immediate FBI handler. If you're talking, Whitey Bulger was an informant, and he's giving information to the FBI
That's
about
what the government
mafia,
alleges.
Is that John Connolly not only was his FBI informant, but was actually taking bribes from Whitey Bulger, and that John Morris, who is...
The government doesn't allege the bribes part.
No. It's... Well, no. It's part of it that he was giving money.
They're not referring to it as a bribe. They're saying it was part of a program.
But, yes. So that John Connolly was corrupt, and that his immediate supervisor, John Morris, was also corrupt, and that they both knew that Whitey was this evil, terrible person who was way more dangerous, at least into the 80s, than the Italian mafia was in Boston. But if you know anything about how top echelon informants work, or just how organized crime in general, it's very obvious that he had a lot more than just two FBI agents on his payroll.
It was sort of easy for the government, from my perspective, to throw the sort of guilt onto John Connolly because it was an easy connection, because John Connolly and...
John Morris is the immediate supervisor.
Right, but John Connolly and Whitey Bulger actually grew up together in the same...
Yeah, so and we can go back now to just the beginning of Whitey Bulger's kind of criminal career, because that kind of ties into it. What's good about the book is that it goes really into detail about his rise to power. But it doesn't give a lot of detail to like his downfall, of how like he eventually did become to get indicted, of how like the jig was up apparently. I'm assuming that just either the FBI realized that they really couldn't keep this going any longer, and eventually came to the point where they had to indict him.
Yeah, well, there was pressure from other law enforcement agencies, because a lot of the other law enforcement agencies, like the I think the
Massachusetts State Police were very pro getting Bulger and Bulger's right-hand man, who was Steve Fleming. They kind of ran the Winter Hell together. And when the indictments came, the agreement was that the Massachusetts State Police were going to arrest Stephen Fleming, and that the FBI were going to arrest Whitey Bulger. And a lot of people think that that's why Whitey Bulger was able to get away and Stephen Fleming wasn't, because the FBI were able to tip him off while they couldn't do the same thing for Stephen Fleming because it's a different agency. So let's go back to so he's kind of a criminal his entire life. When he's in early teen in like the early 40s, he's kind of part of this street gang called it was called like the Leprechaun Crew, and it's basically like this gang of Irish
stereotypical shit I've ever heard in my life.
It was the early 40s. It was called like the Leprechaun Gang or the Leprechaun Crew or something. Basically, teenage robbers and thieves and stuff.
They all kind of start out like that.
They all kind of start out like that. John Gotti very much started out like that.
Sammy Garvano, I was thinking of.
Yes. And he leaves when he's 18 to go into the military. As like people say, it was like somewhat a vain attempt for him to get his life together. He doesn't, because in the military, there are several assaults. He ends up getting discharged for going AWOL, which is basically he left the military base without permission, and like that was the final straw that gets him kicked out.
Not very good with authority, this guy.
Yeah. And you see that when he becomes a criminal. He starts out, he's robbing banks and hijacking trucks in the early 50s. He gets arrested in 1956 in federal prison. He's in Alcatraz. We mentioned on I keep bringing up the book Chaos because a lot of the things kind of come in to play with just corrupt FBI programs.
Wasn't there a rumor that he was part of one of the acid studies or something like that?
It's not a rumor. He was.
Okay. So why don't you just explain that a little bit for people who aren't familiar?
In the 1950s, in federal prisons, there was a CIA program called MK Ultra. And what MK Ultra was basically using LSD to experiment on people against their will. They were kind of trying to make like brainwashed assassins, of turning someone who would normally not be a hyper violent person to then go against their moral code, and you're basically creating a brainwashed assassin. So it is confirmed that Whitey Bulger was experimented on for this program. Whether that's what led to him becoming such a violent person later in life, I don't know. He has a history of assaulting people and robbing people before then.
Yeah, it's like he was, he was kind of on track to be a gangster his whole life. I'm not sure. I mean, look, I'm sure it didn't help. Maybe it would explain some of the more gruesome aspects of what he was involved in, because a lot of people in the mafia are violent, but not to the extent that Bulger was. Some of them certainly are, like when you think of Roy Demayo or something like that.
Yes.
But I mean, there's generally a rule. I don't know how strictly everybody follows it, but there's generally a rule in the mafia that you're not really going to kill women, and you're certainly not going to kill underage people, which he did both.
Yes.
So he's just a very, very sick individual. I'll be personally honest. Like Whitey Bulger, I love gangster history and stuff like that. I find it fascinating. As many people do, but there's something about when you cross that line and you start getting really dark. He's more, to me, he seems more like a serial killer. He was involved in like classic gangster rackets, whether it's loan sharking, drug dealing, gambling, things of that nature, extortion. But there's definitely a side where it's just goes into the depraved.
There are few. There are few, all gangsters are kind of like evil or bad people, but
Sure.
there are very few characters in the history of organized crime who really past that level into the depraved of if they hadn't been groomed their entire life to be a gangster, they probably would have ended up being a serial killer. And you brought up Roy DeMayo, who did cross that line, you read about Roy DeMayo or Whitey Bulger, and it does feel more like they are serial killers.
Right.
And with Roy DeMayo, of a lot of people who were in his gang, in his crew, ended up leaving because they were saying, I was afraid that if Roy DeMayo got bored enough, he would just kill me for the fun of it. And there's another thing about Roy DeMayo. I don't know if this is true about Whitey Bulger, but people would say that if he went too long without killing someone, he would kind of get anxiety. He would kind of get like nervous and jumpy if like he had went too long without murdering someone.
Yeah, I mean that's like addict behavior.
Yes. So we get back to he's in federal prison. These LSD experiments are done on him in the 50s. He gets out in 1965, and this is where you're talking about of this kind of Irish gang war that's going on in South Boston that he kind of uses to rise up. So the Winter Hill Gang, which is the gang that Whitey Bulger ends up becoming the boss of, was not at the time based in South Boston. It was based in Somerville. There are kind of two different groups that are fighting against each other. So there's the Keelan brothers, who they're two brothers. There's Donald and Kenny are these two Irish gangsters who are major loan sharks and run kind of gambling dens throughout South Boston. And then there's a group called the Mullen Gang.
Yep.
And the Mullen Gang is run by this guy, Donald McLaughlin, or maybe it's Donald McGullin. I believe Donald McGullin and Patrick Nee. And so the Mullen Gang and the Keelan Gang are fighting, and the Keelans, they like more see themselves as like business gangsters, like they're into loan sharking and more like not upscale, but more like serious crime. And you have it right there. McGonigal?
McGonigal.
Okay. So the Keelans hire...
No, sorry, that's Paulie.
Paulie McGonigal.
Keelan. It's Donald Keelan.
Donald Keelan.
Yeah.
So the Keelans kind of hire Whitey Bulger as their enforcers because they're tired of getting robbed by the Mullen Gang. So there is this war going on, and what happens is that the Winter Hill Gang from Somerville, they want to kind of get involved in the rackets of South Boston, so they align themselves with the Mullen Gang. And the Mullen Gang is really winning, and you feel like they're going to be the dominant force in South Boston. So Whitey Bulger makes a deal of he's going to take out his boss, Donald Keelan, and he says to Howie Winter, the head of Winter Hill, he says, I can run the Keelan Gang better than they can. You let me take them out and take over their rackets. I'll make peace with the Mullins, and then we'll both work for you. So that's what happens, is he kills Donald Keelan, and then Kenny Keelan, the younger brother, he kind of just chases out of town. He's saying, like, you're done in this business, and if you come back here, I'm going to kill you. So now the major loan sharking and gambling is controlled by Whitey Bulger. And the Mullen Gang, that's still kind of associated with the Winter Hill Gang, they're not really into loan sharking, or more like crimes where you have a pretty standard income of every week, you know how much you're going to make. They
call that the peanut butter and jelly of the mafia, the gambling and loan sharking.
Yeah. The Mullen Gang isn't into that. They're more of like a stick-up crew. Like they're a group of thieves and robbers, and that's what they do. So Whitey sees this and says, hey, you're making more money with me than you are with the Mullins. Just let me take out those guys, and then I'll just be your guy in South Boston.
Right.
So you see his way of kind of finessing of first he takes out his boss, and then he convinces Howie Winter, who's kind of the major Irish crime figure, to let him take out his rivals. And now Whitey Bulger is the main kind of boss of South Boston.
So how does he eventually take Howie Winter's spot?
So he takes Howie Winter at the end of the 70s. There is this, the entire like upper, I guess echelon is the right word to say. The entire like hierarchy of the Winter Hill Gang is involved with this horse racing scheme of they're going to fix horse races, basically, and they all get indicted, but they don't know that the indictments are coming yet. Steve Flemmi and his brother Vincent had long time been informants for the FBI. Vincent had kind of been a hitman for both the Irish mob and the Italians. Mm-hmm. He kind of went back and forth, but Steven was always, even though he was Italian, he was always more with the Irish. So Stephen Flemmi and Whitey Bulger kind of have this relationship. And Stephen Flemmi gets the word that everybody is going to be indicted. So he turns to Whitey Bulger and he says, like, let's make a deal. I've been an FBI informant. You can come in with me. We'll make this deal with the FBI. They'll take our names off the indictments. Everybody else in the Winter Hill Gang will go to prison and we can take over.
Right.
And that's what they do.
So why was Stephen Flemmi an FBI informant all those years? And what? So I feel like that doesn't get spoken about enough. Is that because you always think Steve Flemmi is Whitey Bulger's right-hand man. Whitey Bulger's a rat.
Yeah.
He had a relationship with the FBI. But the fact of the matter is that Steve Flemmi already had that relationship.
So Steve Flemmi had that relationship with his brother. His brother was an informant who, like I said, Vincent Flemmi was a hitman for both the Patriarca crime family, which was the Italian mob. They kind of ran North Boston. Yeah. The Patriarca crime family, their main kind of base of operation is Providence, New Jersey.
Yes.
Their underboss was Jerry Angulo, who... his base of operations was kind of the north end of Boston. So when you look at Boston, at least in the 70s and 80s, the north end was very Italian. And then what's called Southie, you know, is very Irish. So there was a while when Whitey Bulger controlled Southie, and then the Italians controlled the north. Right. And going back to the Winter Hill Gang, Vincent Flemmi was kind of able to be this everyone hitman and like take out whoever he wants because he had this relationship with the FBI. And since he was going back and forth between the gangs, he's kind of able to give the FBI information on both of them. So he's a very important informant for them. And I talked in my smaller breakdown about another gangster called Joe Barboza.
Yeah.
And Joe Barboza was an Italian. He specifically worked for the Italians. He didn't really work for the Winter Hill Gang at all. And Joe Barboza and Vincent Flemmi killed this Irish gangster, Teddy Deegan, together. And at trial, Joe Barboza lies and frames this guy.
Horrible story.
Their FBI handler, H. Paul Rico, was also notoriously corrupt. Later, he would go to prison for a gambling scandal. Mm-hmm. He was very corrupt, and basically he did not want Stephen Flemmi off the streets because he was getting this information on the mafia for him. But the police had a very good murder case against him. Yeah. I mean, he very clearly murdered this man, Teddy Deegan. So what H. Paul Rico does is he gets another gangster, Joseph Barboza, on the stand to
frame him.
To frame another guy, Joseph Salvati. So Joseph Salvati, an innocent man in Boston who had nothing to do with organized crime whatsoever, is framed for a murder of his gangster. He goes to jail for, I believe he didn't get out until like the early 2000s.
No, he did the whole sentence.
Right? Or he did the whole sentence, and it wasn't until later.
He did, yeah.
Joseph Salvati, the innocent man, plays kind of a large part in this book because the Whitey Bulger defense team kind of wants to keep bringing up Joseph Barboza by saying, like, this is everything with Whitey Bulger is an extension of this. It's not this one case of just this gangster paid off some FBI agents. Actually, this is a history of how the Boston FBI treats its echelon informants. Mm-hmm. And that it's a long history of doing corrupt things to make sure your informants stay on the streets. And it's actually the Joe Barboza case that convinces Whitey Bulger to become an informant, because Stephen Fleming is saying, look, my brother's an informant, and they got somebody to lie in court to protect him. So imagine what they'll do for you. So Howie Winter and the rest of the Winter Hill Gang, they all get indicted. Stephen Fleming and Whitey Bulger, their names are taken off the indictments. And now Whitey Bulger and Stephen Fleming kind of are in charge of this massive Irish enterprise. And when people talk about Stephen Fleming, they kind of make it seem like he was Whitey's right-hand man. Yeah. But it's very much so that they ran the gang together. It was a lot more of a partnership than it was Stephen Fleming was his right-hand man. So we get into the trial, and they try to bring up Joe Barboza, and the judge is
the book deals primarily with the trial.
The book is about the trial. It goes through.
So you should be clear. You made the point that he received information in 1994 that indictments were potentially or definitely coming down. He flees, and he's basically on the FBI most wanted list for about 16 years before he's captured. Why don't you talk about, before we get into the trial, set up what happened, how he went on the lam, and how he eventually was captured?
Well, that's the thing about the book, is that they don't go really into it that much.
No, I know, but just to give some context. I mean, it's a pretty. I mean,
he's captured in California with his girlfriend.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
I mean, you don't find that interesting? Like, the guy was on the run for 15 years.
I mean, yeah, it's interesting. I actually remember. So I have a friend from Boston. When she was growing up, her dad used to like scare her, like, "Oh, you have to."
That's so fucked up.
It used to be, because this was back in the day when he was still on the loose. She was like, if you don't eat your vegetables, Whitey Bulger is gonna come get you.
Jesus Christ.
Oh no, I mean, he's on the run. He's living with his girlfriend in California for 16 years.
Apparently not a big deal. Watch out for this guy. He's going to go on the run.
No, it is very interesting.
I don't know, whatever. He's on the run for 15 years, like everybody does. You hit that part in your life where you're hiding from the government for 15 years.
I'm going to be honest. I don't know how he lasted 16 years without confessing.
That's the point. It's insane.
It is insane. I don't really know how he was. I don't really know how he managed to do it.
No.
I mean, it's crazy. I don't really know if he had some secret. He definitely didn't divulge it.
What do you mean, in terms of if someone was protecting him that time?
Yeah, if someone was protecting him the entire time, he certainly didn't divulge it. Yeah. So this is the trial, and the book does a very good job of kind of bleeding.
He's captured in 2011.
He's captured in 2011. The trial is 2012. 2013.
Right.
Yes. And the book does a very good job of with each person that goes on the witness stand, it's almost like a new chapter of Whitey Bulger's life is unveiling. A new chapter of just history of organized crime in Boston is kind of being unveiled. And it is about the trial, but you very much get the sense of his rise to power throughout witness testimony.
Right.
It's also during the trial, like why he's very old. He's in his 90s when he
83.
He's 83, and he's very much sits there like he's this mythic figure. Which is strange because like he's this old man. He's silent for most of the trial, except he screams "fuck you" to Kevin Weeks.
Yeah.
Because Kevin Weeks was his right-hand man who, testified against him.
Yes.
It's very much
as they
like,
all do. They
they
all
all do.
turn into rats.
Stephen Fleming turns into a rat. Kevin Weeks does.
I don't understand. So Steve Fleming got like the raw end of the deal sort of thing. I mean, he's a piece of shit. He should rot in hell. Don't get me wrong.
He got life in prison.
No, I know. But my point is like they wheel him out for all these like trials. He's basically becomes like a professional witness for the government. And it's like, but you have life in prison. So...
I mean,
I guess they say
I'm sure he's getting treated better than other prisoners.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, Whitey Bulger died because someone got him.
They let him into general. They let him into general population, and on day one of him being in general population, I believe
he gets his eyes popped out.
He got beaten with like a. I guess they put like a. I think they put like a chain. Or like some kind of lock in a sock. I don't know how the fuck you get a lock in prison, but
yeah.
We mentioned the guy who killed him once because he was also
he was in the Genovese family, but he was never made because he was Greek.
Exactly.
Yes.
And he was part of Anthony Arellato's crew, who was a made Genovese captain in Springfield, Massachusetts area. So it's just interesting because I would just imagine that those guys growing up, like, because they were in the like early 2000s, like that crew, Anthony Arellato was running around. So I could just imagine they were all like, yeah, like Whitey Bulger's the ultimate rat, and then like one day
they get
you're face to face with him in prison, and that's what happens. I mean, that's such a fitting end for him. I just can't imagine.
He deserved it.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to say anyone deserves that, but if there's anyone who does deserve it, I guess it's him. But I can't. Could you imagine being 83 fucking years old and getting your fucking head bashed in?
Well, not terrible, because fuck him. One of the more disgusting things that he did was there's a story of there was a Catholic school in Boston that would let Whitey Bulger like through like a secret compartment in the wall look at the young girls while they were changing.
That's fucking insane.
He was a disgusting person.
Sure.
And Steve Fleming too, because he had a relationship with a teenager who ended up getting murdered by Whitey Bulger because they were afraid that she knew too much.
And they buried her like in the basement.
They buried her in the basement of a house. Yes. But that
I never understand that move, by the way. Like, whose house was it, first of all?
I don't know whose house it was. I think it was just an empty house that...
Yeah. I just don't understand burying someone under a house.
Well, if you believe what happened in The Irishman, that's what happened to Jimmy Hoffa, too. Yeah. I know that you don't really take everything...
It's not me. I mean, a lot of people say that movie was kind of fiction, but...
Right, but not even talking about the movie. I mean, with Frank Sheeran's book, like, that's what he says. Like, it's a house in Detroit that we buried him under.
Yeah.
Also, I mean...
That house is going to be fucking haunted.
Yeah.
Haunted houses are real, people.
The story of Deborah Davis, who is Stephen Fleming's teenage girlfriend, who... They said that Whitey Bulger strangled her to death.
Deborah Davis or Deborah Hussey?
They were both Stephen Fleming's girlfriends.
Right.
Who both allegedly... Well, not alleged. I mean, he was found guilty in court. But I never really believed that story that Whitey did it. I always thought that was Stephen Fleming. Because... the idea of just your girlfriend, girlfriend knows too much, so he have to kill her. Like, just it never like seemed as a convincing enough motive.
I don't know. I could see that.
I don't know. I think that it's much more that Stephen Fleming was a violent guy who killed two of his girlfriends.
Sure.
Who wanted to pin it on Bulger.
Oh, well. Yeah.
I don't know. I just
I wouldn't be surprised either way, man.
No, I would not be surprised.
They're just both big pieces
even
of
if
shit.
it was Stephen Fleming and not Whitey Bulger, it does not take away of how much of a dirtbag that this guy was.
Yes.
Another thing about Howie Winter. So we brought up that he went to prison. He gets out in 2002, and then in 2012 he's indicted again, because he kind of becomes like a property manager, Howie Winter, after prison, and apparently like extorted someone for some money said like, hey, I still know like people in South Boston who will come and like break your legs.
Oh my God.
And
old habits die hard, man.
Yeah, and
How fucking old was he at that point? He must have been a dinosaur.
He was in his 90s, yeah. And I mean, it was 2012. He's probably about 10 years older than Whitey Bulger, so he would have been 93.
That's
and
insane.
He's telling people that, like, I still know people in South Boston.
He's like, yo, I'm still heavy out there in these streets.
To this day, Howie Winter claims he's completely innocent to this day.
Howie Winter's still alive?
Howie Winter is still alive.
Jesus
He claims he's completely innocent, and he also claims that the Winter Hill Gang never existed.
That's awesome.
Shout out to that guy. Of not only was
he's holding it down.
He's holding it down. I respect that, of just like knowing a lot of how these like gangsters end up, that they all become informants and rats. Mm-hmm. Of how great is it at 93 years old, you've been in prison since 78 to 2002, and you're still just like like an old dude who's just exist. Like, yeah, the mafia isn't real. It was like, there is no mafia.
That's what Joey Massino used to say before he became a rat too. But he was like, it's just old Italian guys going out to dinner, and they call us the mafia.
And with Howie Winter, he was just like, I mean, you're talking about gangsters, but he was a better person than Whitey Bulger. Specifically, he was a loan shark and a gambler, but back in the 70s, they were not involved with drugs, the Winter Hill Gang. Yeah. That was something that was very much of Whitey Bulger and Stephen Fleming, who wanted to bring that in. And just talking about South Boston, of kind of like during the 80s, the mythic figure who Whitey Bulger was, he was sometimes referred to as our gangster. Like, yes, he was a gangster, but he's like the people's gangster. And obviously this wasn't true, but
that wasn't true at all. He was extorting his own neighbors.
He was extorting his own neighborhood. And he was basically the idea around South Boston was just like, yes, Whitey Bulger is a gangster, but he's keeping the worst people out. And
when in fact he wasn't.
When in fact he wasn't. When in fact he was the worst.
Drugs.
When he was really the person who brought drugs to South Boston. And he kind of people had this idea that he was the one keeping the drug dealers out. And it's like, well, yeah, he was, but he was replacing them with his own guys. And
it's all about just controlling the chain of command.
There is also like a racial thing to it, because Whitey Bulger, this was in the 70s.
Wait, are you trying to say that they were racist in South Boston in the 70s and 60s? Irish people?
I'm trying to say that, yes.
Come on.
He was also like one of the leading forces to stop segregation in Boston, was Whitey Bulger.
He's just like, how many different ways can I be a piece of shit?
And I always thought of like when the Irish people of South Boston were, they're talking about Whitey Bulger's a gangster, but he's keeping the bad gangsters out.
Well, of course. It's always a dog whistle.
That's kind of what it's a dog whistle.
It's always a dog
when
whistle.
They're saying he's keeping drugs out, really he's the biggest drug dealer in all of Boston.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, and by the way, the politicians on Long Island in 2020 are using the same dog whistle stuff, just putting out fake propaganda shit on Facebook about how Black Lives Matter supporters are going to invade your town.
Yes.
That's dog whistle shit 101.
I don't know if I should bring up the guy's name.
Yeah, what's that piece of shit? Fuck him. No, bring him up. What's his name?
Mike Lapid.
Yeah, fuck you.
He lost his primary.
Good. He's a fucking racist piece of shit.
He is, and
he's my age, and I don't know if he went to MHS.
I don't know where. I don't know if he did.
I don't think he went to my high school.
He wanted
fuck that guy.
He wanted a group of all white people to wear all white and confront the Black Lives Matter protesters.
Where did you hear that?
All right, maybe I shouldn't have said that.
Who cares? Who's gonna come after you?
All right, who's gonna come after me? This was a post on like one of the Massapequa.
Yeah, he knocked on our door one time, and I happened to be at the house, and I answered the door, and he introduces himself, and I recognized him, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I'm running for blah blah blah," and then he's like, a platform, to keep people like, for people like us.
Yeah.
And he winked at me.
Yeah.
And I wish that I had my phone recording, and I was just going to be like, hey, you mean like, just so I can catch him. But anyway, my point is,
he would have been a supporter of Whitey Bulger.
I don't know if I'm going that far, but
I don't know how far I want to go with this period. All right, back to.
I'm glad he lost his primary.
Yes, let's get back.
Hopefully they take his stupid ass fucking face down from all over the sun.
They won't, because it was the primary for Congress, and he's still the state assemblyman.
Yeah, he's a douchebag.
I don't know how far I want to go.
I love how we did 5 minutes on a very particular politician that nobody knows about from a town that nobody knows about.
I know. I don't know.
Let's move on. Hey, you remember when we saw the movie Black Mass?
All right, the movie Black Mass sucks.
Yeah, we saw it in L.A. We were out there.
Yes, and it's very... It makes it seem like Whitey Bulger conned these two FBI agents.
Right.
And
in
the movie.
Yeah.
And Black Mass, the movie and the book, is very official narrative
of the government.
Of the government. Of
right.
like, this is
of course.
Of basically like it was two corrupt FBI agents and like no need to look further. Johnny Depp is terrible in that movie.
I didn't think he was terrible.
I feel like he's doing a Joe Pesci impression. There's one scene particularly that feels like it was shot for the trailer that I hate.
Where they're at the dinner table?
They're at the dinner table.
I knew you were going to say that.
And Johnny Depp, and as Whitey
it's kind of
Bulger,
like a funny how
it's very much a funny how scene. He's talking to David Harbour, who plays John Morris, and he's just like, "Oh, how'd you make the steak?" And he's like, "It's a family restaurant." He's like, "Well, tell me." It's like, "All right, you saw it," and then he's just like, "I'll fucking murder you." And then he just flips the switch and is like, "I'll fucking murder you right now. You tell anybody about this fucking how you cook this steak. That's a family recipe. You keep it." And then they all laugh, and it's very much like a Joe Pesci funny how. And I watched that, and I was like, that scene was shot for the fucking trailer. Because the funny how scene in Goodfellas is great. It's because it's early on in the film, and we don't know that Joe Pesci is a psychopath yet. We don't know that he's a crazy person yet. And that's kind of the first flip of just like, oh, this guy, it's not all fun and games with this guy. And then he switched back. So it very much, with Joe Pesci in Goodfellas, that scene very much sets a precedent for the rest of the movie of you do not know when this guy is joking or not.
Yeah.
And it shows in with the scene of Michael Spider, of Christopher from The Sopranos.
Michael
Imperioli, when they are joking around, and then Joe Pesci takes out a gun and murders him.
Yeah.
And it sets the tone of the rest of the movie of like, you don't know where you stand with this guy.
No.
With the Whitey Bulger scene in Black Mass, we already know that Whitey Bulger's a psychopath.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
We already know. We've already seen him murder people not for way less, but for like kind of minor insults. I don't even remember because it's been so long since I've seen Black Mass. I mean, I saw it when it came out, and I never wanted to watch it since because it's not good.
I think that's like the last movie before Johnny Depp like kind of lost his mind.
Yeah, well, his wife kind of beat the shit out of him.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't know if you want to touch that.
I mean, it's
I don't know what the
confirmed
facts are.
now.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
I'll let you speak on that.
We don't have to get into it. Amber Heard like cut two of his fingers off.
That's not so good.
No, it's not so good.
Generally, you want 5 of those. I mean, 10.
10 of those. Let's get back to Whitey Bulger. So, I want to get back into the history of kind of how he became the boss of Boston as a whole.
Go for it.
Of basically, I explained before of how it's very much the Irish in Southie, and then the Italians in the North, and this is where Whitey Bulger and his relationship with John Connolly, the FBI agent, comes in. Is basically. He uses his connection, the FBI, to kind of get them to focus on the Italians in the North, because he wants to get rid of Jerry Argiulo, the underboss, and kind of have him taken out. So that's kind of like one of the first things. I mean, he becomes an informant in 1978, and then those indictments all happen in 83. Mm-hmm. So after they kind of get taken out of North Boston, now Whitey Bulger is the official boss.
Right.
And Whitey Bulger is bringing drugs in, and he's treating Boston as like his personal playground. Basically, he has no other competition. And back then, it was very clear, at least in the 80s, when you're talking about Irish crime, they used to have a saying of like, no one cares unless they have an Italian last name. Of like, everything was very much, we're going against the mafia. We're going against the mafia. This was like,
well, you know what the FBI stands for, right?
Forever bothering Italians.
Word up. Shout out to Grandma.
Yes. So this was like around the same time that they're doing the commission case in New York, and every FBI agent wanted the next big mafia hit, won the next big mafia case. And when you're talking about Whitey Bulger, I mean, it's another thing. No one wanted to go after this Irish guy. And there's also kind of, a lot of law enforcement are Irish.
Yeah, no
and
shit. Not to mention, some of them grew up together.
And TJ English in his...
I mean, you should speak, Whitey Bulger's brother is a fucking...
Yes. And Whitey Bulger's brother was a state senator for Massachusetts.
A big-time state.
Was a big-time state senator of Massachusetts.
Big deal.
Yes. And they would appear together in public.
See, that's crazy.
Yes. And at public events, where he would be speaking as a state senator and his gangster brother would be next to him. Because you talk about Whitey Bulger, of his reputation in South Boston.
Yeah.
He was not seen as this evil person.
No, he's seen like a John Gotti in Ozone Park.
He was seen like very much like how John Gotti was seen in the late...
talk to his victims. They don't have that. They don't have that opinion of him. Like our friend who ends up going missing, and we should probably talk about the documentary a little bit. But
the people,
the liquor store owner who was, extorted.
Yes.
What was his name? Stephen Weeks or something? No, not Kevin Weeks.
No. I forget his name. But there was, the documentary. What
was it called?
Whitey, the United States government versus James Bulger.
Yeah, great documentary. And it's also a good documentary
to go along with this book, because this documentary also follows the trial, and you get like kind of subtext and exposition about Whitey's life and rise to power. I mean, the book really gets into it, but I always saw that this book and that documentary are very much companion pieces. What was his name?
Stephen Rakes.
So Stephen Rakes was a liquor store owner who basically Whitey Bulger came to, and he was saying that the Italians took a hit out on him. And was like, the Italians are going to come kill you.
Whitey Bulger and Kevin Weeks show up to Stephen Rakes' house, and they say, we were hired to kill you, and we're either going to kill you or we'll protect you, but you're going to make us partners in your liquor store business, a.k.a. we're going to... Yes. It's like there's a famous Sopranos episode about it. What do they call blowing it out or something? When they take in the Sopranos, when they take the guy's sporting goods store,
I believe busting it out. Basically, they explain it in the Sopranos, and they explain it in Goodfellas too. Of basically, you run up everything on the store's credit card. take out a bunch of insurance policies, and you basically get as much money from a store as possible. And then you leave and your name's not on anything. So you're leaving whoever the original owner is with, the bills and the lawsuits that were going to come after that.
Yeah, we don't know if that was going to be the case or if they just
I don't know if they just wanted extortion money.
Or they might like put in like a dummy owner and take the money. But anyway.
But he was supposed to testify against Whitey Bulger, and then the day before, he went missing and is found dead.
Yes.
And it turned out it had nothing to do with the case. He was poisoned by like a business associate.
Yeah, which is insane. What are we, fucking living in Russia?
You're living in Boston.
Touche.
But it is just very suspicious timing that it's right before he's about to testify.
By the way, this
Whitey
is pretty
Bulger.
good. We've been going for like 40 minutes. I have not made fun of the Red Sox yet.
Fuck the Red Sox.
All right. Wait, we're running a business here, Gregory.
Right.
I'm sure we have a lot of people from Boston watching this episode. We just want to say
we're from Long Island.
No, that's fine. We respect the passion of people who are I got to be honest, the older I get, and obviously I'm always a diehard Yankee fan, always. And of course I want to say what you said, but out of respect to our viewers, I'm not going to say that. But I will say I do appreciate a loyal, strong fan base that cares, rather than like a place that they don't care about about their sports team. Fuck it. Move
fine.
on. I'm being the politician.
I never kind of believed that he was killed in relation to Whitey Bulger.
Stephen Rakes.
Yes, Stephen Rakes. Whitey Bulger had no money at the time. He had any wealth he had from being a mob boss, he was well past that from living on the run. He couldn't pay for his own attorneys. His two defense attorneys were both court appointed for him. And
at the time of Stephen Rakes' extortion?
No. At the time that Stephen Rakes goes missing.
Oh yeah.
At the time of the trial. He can't afford his own lawyer, and the court has to appoint them to it.
Right.
And it's crazy because you're reading it. You're reading the book, and Bulger he sits in the courtroom very quiet, and he's still I mean, you can tell from the book, he still has this aura about him of here is an 80-year-old man who has no money, who has no connections, and people are still kind of uneasy and afraid around him. And you talk about I have mentioned more that sometimes with people, the myth of who they were is more important than who they actually were. So even if that time he was an old man with nothing to his name who couldn't beat someone up if he tried,
right,
the myth of who Whitey Bulger was still very much in that courtroom. And you can tell it in this book. He just has a presence about it. This presence of evil that kind of just surrounds him.
I mean, look at what we just saw with Joe D'Angelo and the Golden State Killer testimony, or they had a bunch of witnesses.
Yeah.
Well, they had a bunch of ex-victims come in and kind
of right.
They do this thing where they're before sentencing, the victims are allowed to speak.
Yeah.
And I mean, Joe D'Angelo's an elderly guy who's just he's an old man sitting there, but that fucking evil is just palpable.
Yeah. I don't know. It's so crazy.
Yeah.
But
where are we going here, Greg?
We're going here when I'm talking about how the official story does not make a lot of sense. There's no way it was two FBI agents.
No.
This guy ran Boston from the late 70s to the mid 90s, and no one went after him. And you talk about the idea of he was Irish and they didn't really care about you unless you were Italian. You weren't a big boss. This is the boss of Boston, and the commission case is over in '86. You can't go after other criminals after that. I mean, the mafia is dead after '86, and TJ English, he doesn't really bring it up in this book. He does bring it up in his book on the Westies. So the Westies were kind of the Irish mob in New York City in the 70s and 80s. And there was kind of in NYPD or just the New York FBI of when people wanted to investigate the Westies, they were like, why are you looking into our own people? Meaning, why are you looking into the Irish since it was law enforcement in New York was mostly Irish? Why aren't you looking into the Italians? And TJ English, he writes a lot about Irish gangsters, and then he has a few books on Cuban gangsters.
Yep.
And he's my favorite organized crime author because most authors, they want to talk about the Italian mob. Like that's the draw, the Italian mob. That's like, famous those are the stories you want to read.
Gotti.
But there's the famous names. And I always thought like, yes, the Italian mob is very much at the center of organized crime in this country. And there's so many other outliers. There's so many other gangs that are kind of on the outskirts of the Irish mob or the Cuban mafia that a lot of other authors don't touch on, but TJ English almost exclusively touches on them. I mean, he has this. He has the Westies. He has about the Cuban mob that ran like the Bolita racket, which was basically the illegal. Havana Nocturne was more While Havana Nocturne is really his only book that's about kind of the classic Italian mafia, it's more so about Meyer Lansky.
But it's to do with Cuba.
to do with Cuba. But also he very much makes a main character of Meyer Lansky, who is a Jewish gangster who, I mean, he was close to the center circle of like the the bosses of Italian organized crime, but he was not a part of that. Or he was not, an official member.
Sure. But I mean, we've seen countless examples of people who are not official members who are just as powerful as captains.
Right.
In Meyer Lansky's case,
Meyer Lansky was almost
that.
as powerful as the bosses.
Right.
But I mean,
TJ English is great. He's also a great guest on like different shows I've seen him on.
Yes.
He's a fascinating dude.
And I've met him once in person because I had worked on a documentary about John Gotti, and we had interviewed him for that, and He was just great because he's a type of person that you're able to get in to just give history of organized crime. Like he just knows all the details. And
what was that? That came out on A&E, right?
Came out on A&E. So it was a ongoing series called Biography on A&E, and like basically they would do just like four episodes on like a different person throughout history. So we did throughout American history. So we did the one on John Gotti.
But wasn't it called Gotti, Father and Son?
It was Gotti, Father and Son, and it was very much about the relationship between John Gotti and John Gotti Jr.
Yeah.
And we're talking about bad gangster movies. We brought up Black Mass.
God.
We got to bring up Gotti, the John Travolta Gotti movie. Terrible.
Horrible.
What they could have done in that movie that we kind of did in our documentary was this story of a father who wants his son to follow in his footsteps.
It's a family business.
And a son who his entire life has admired his father, who has wanted to be his father his entire life, who grows up and realizes, I need to be my own person.
Because he was getting in a lot of trouble.
Yes.
Yeah.
But basically
he wasn't cut out.
But basically that understanding of my father being like a stone cold street guy, if you do not talk to law enforcement and if you need to spend the rest of his life in prison, then you do that. He was like, I am not that person. And a lot of it is him trying to convince his father, like, look, I'm not you. I can't do that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the difference between growing up how John Gotti grew up, like like a fucking, you know, wild person.
John Gotti,
and then
yeah.
John Gotti Jr. growing up, you know, basically in a comfortable environment. It's like, you know, they're different people.
Yeah.
How much time did you spend with John Gotti Jr. for that? Quite a lot.
Yeah, a while. I don't know how much detail I'm really like allowed to go into about it. We interviewed him a lot of times. I don't know, probably close to 10 times.
Yeah, it's a good
documentary. That I
really
can say
it's
about
so
it.
much better than the movie.
And it's so much better than the movie.
They dropped it right before the movie came out.
The movie is so fucking bad.
You're in the documentary.
Yes.
He plays a young...
Yes.
Oh, you're not
Hold
allowed
on.
to say that?
No, I'm allowed to say that. We do reenactments, and basically when John Gotti is a teenager, you don't see my face, but it's my body.
Driving a car.
Yeah. And it's supposed to be teenage John Gotti.
Yeah.
Of John Gotti as like, I think he became a driver for this mafia captain. I want to say he was like 14 or 15.
Yeah.
And it's weird that like they got him so young back then.
A lot of those guys.
I guess that's the culture. And something bringing this back to T.J. English as an author is he very much relates it to the culture.
Yes.
With the Irish, especially in the Westies, of it's very much just like this gang that you're a part of is built into who we are. And he talks about like loyalty tests on like the west side of Manhattan of if you want to prove that you're my friend and you're loyal to me, you have to make this body disappear.
Right. I mean,
that's the loyalty
normal.
test.
That's basic shit.
That's basic shit.
I mean, it's like whatever, dude. You know.
If when you're talking about the Cuban mob in his book The Corporation, he's very much talks about this system of bolita, this illegal gambling, is a part of the Cuban culture, and like when they came here, it's something they brought with them. Mm-hmm. And you always felt like with organized crime and certain groups, it's very much a trying to hold on to their culture. Of their groups who are slowly becoming Americanized, and in a weird way by keeping up with organized crime, especially like with Italians and the mafia.
Yeah,
it's very much a way. I mean,
I was just gonna say
buy into that, but no, Tony Soprano definitely does.
Yeah, okay. I mean, there's a difference between like the people who actually came to this country who had to really survive, and there's a difference between like using that as an excuse.
Yes.
Tony Soprano used that as an excuse.
Yeah.
He was born in like 1961. He didn't have... Anyway, but the point is, you know, even within our own family, without getting too detailed about it, on our, you know, the Irish side of our family came to this country, and they did what they knew. Which was, you know, whether it was legal or not, sometimes not. Yeah. They did what they know, and that was the alcohol business. And then on our mother's side of the family, on our grandmother's side of the family, a lot of them did what they know, which was not always on, you know, technically legal. Yeah. You know, but those were people that were coming into a new place trying to survive, literally survive. So. Yeah. There's definitely something to be said to that, but also people use it as an excuse where it's like, okay, you know.
Yeah, well, I mean, Whitey Bulger, like, I don't think he gave a shit about Irish pride at all.
Of course not. He didn't give a fuck about anything.
Yeah, I mean, he was a disgusting human being who... I mentioned it before, just about like the way the slimy way he kind of rises to power. Of he finds someone to work for and then fucks that person over.
I mean, yeah, exactly. That's why you live your whole life like a fucking douchebag. Yeah. You live your whole life just undercutting everybody, and then for what? To hide out like a fucking loser. Yeah. With money in a wall, and then you get captured and you have to spend your rest of your life in a fucking hole, and then you rat out your friends and curse people out in court. These are the people that you were supposed to fucking be brothers in arms with, and then how do you die like a fucking animal, getting your head bashed in at 83? Yeah, it's really. I mean, like it's pathetic shit. It's pathetic shit. And by the way, deserves nothing less. You know, you want to murder women and innocent people and children that are, you know.
With the Kevin Weeks it seems like he's the only person that really gets under Whitey's skin during this trial. Kevin Weeks was kind of this younger gangster who Whitey was basically grooming to be his replacement. And I mean, he was kind of his replacement because Kevin Weeks does run the Winter Hill Gang until like, I think 2000. And then he kind of gives up because it's revealed that Whitey Bulger had been an FBI informant this entire time and he didn't know. Yeah. And I feel like it's very much like a, talk
about a shock.
Yeah, just like, this entire thing. Like, I've been groomed to be this position by a guy who was
There's so many examples
going against everything he told me was like sacred.
There's so many examples of that.
Yeah.
Throughout mafia history now.
Yeah.
You know, like I go back to our guy Vinny Gorgeous. Like,
right.
Who, you know, I mean, he essentially was ratted out by his own boss.
Yes.
You know? Anyway, we got to wrap this thing up, but I do want to bring something up. I know it's not necessarily touched on to the extent in the book that it is in the documentary, but obviously I think it's pretty safe to say that the government's narrative, get ready for this shocker, is not entirely accurate.
No, I think it's ridiculous. I think it's the idea that it was only two people is ridiculous.
No, I understand that, but my question is, in the documentary specifically, they bring up the idea that Connolly was running basically a phony top tier, whatever you want to call it, echelon
informant. Yes.
They bring up his file, and there's a lot of repeated stuff in it and a bunch of basically nonsense mumbo jumbo. It's 700 pages, which is supposed to be over the course of whatever amount of years, 20 something years, maybe more, 30 years, I think. And then it shows examples of actual top echelon informant files.
You're talking about Greg Scarpa.
Yeah, you're talking about 50, 60,000 page volumes. My question is, was he actually... Here's the thing. We know the government was corrupt. We know that their official narrative is bullshit. What I'm on the fence about is, was he actually a legitimate informant for the FBI, or was he controlling them and just paying them for information? In the documentary, he has the quote where he goes, I don't give, I take. Or
he goes, we're not selling, we're buying.
Right. And I don't see anything as to why that couldn't be the case.
I don't see any reason. All right, so no, I don't think that Whitey Bulger wasn't a legitimate informant for the FBI.
You think he was a legitimate?
No, I think he wasn't a legitimate informant.
I tend to agree with you.
I think that he was paying off John Connolly along with multiple other people in the FBI, and to kind of keep this scam going so that it wouldn't be suspicious that they're constantly seen with Whitey Bulger, they open up an informant.
Which was BS.
Yes, they open up
and that
him
would explain,
as an informant.
That would explain why his file was essentially BS.
Yes. So the reason why I tried not to bring up the theory that Whitey Bulger was never an informant was because this book specifically, the documentary is different, but this book specifically, it's talking about basically like that doesn't matter. Like if he was an informant giving them all this information, it still wouldn't justify.
Well, it's
any
almost
of this.
worse.
It's almost worse. And the book is
because then you're officially signing off on murder.
Yes, but basically saying like this case with Whitey Bulger is not an isolated incident. That this is a program that was basically designed for criminals to exploit it. And you talk about Greg Scarpa, who for years was a gangster in Brooklyn for the Colombo family, who he at least murdered 50 people.
Yeah.
You talk about Willie Boy Johnson, who eyewitnesses have him kidnapping people for John Gotti. He never faced prosecution for it. I mean, he was murdered, but he was never going to face prosecution for it.
But he was a true informant.
He wasn't a true informant.
Yeah.
So was Greg Scarpa was a true informant. But the book, what they're trying to make of just like this is a problem with the program as a whole. This is not.
And they closed the program, right?
I mean, the mafia is basically gone. There's no need for it anymore. But the top echelon informant,
that's what I mean.
for the most part, has been disbanded.
Right.
For the most part, like, they don't do that anymore. And nowadays, there's a lot more people who are just willing to cooperate.
Yeah.
Who are,
It's hard to find people who don't cooperate now. When you
Yeah.
hear of someone who's like not cooperating, it's,
Yeah. And I don't know if you're talking about just like the FBI really wanted to take down the mafia and this is what they were willing to do, of just like, well, okay, we're putting one murderer is on the street, but we're getting 20 and we're getting people who are up there and making high decisions. I guess that was something they were willing to live with.
Yeah.
This is the argument that TJ English makes of
Right.
like we can't just look at this as Whitey Bulger. We need to look at this as how the FBI was the FBI was treating informants altogether.
Yeah. No,
That's all
I agree. It's a hell of a book. It's a hell of a documentary.
It is where the
Definitely worth
bodies were
checking it out.
buried. Yeah, but that's the final thought I just want to say of no, I don't believe he was a true informant.
I agree.
But it does not matter. It doesn't matter. In the long run, it doesn't matter because this is how informants were treated. We'll do whatever we need to keep you on the streets. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it doesn't matter. But, I mean, the government is corrupt. They're lying.
Yes. Okay. The book is where the bodies
we can all agree
were
on
buried.
that, right, guys?
The book is Where the Bodies Are Buried by TJ English. I'm a huge fan. I highly recommend all of TJ English's books. He's great.
He's awesome.
If you want to know more about not just the Italian mob, but kind of the crime families that exist around the Italian mob, it's fantastic. This has been Movies by McManus. If you like this podcast, you can check out our YouTube channel. I do smaller breakdowns of kind of each book or movie or comic that we're reviewing that week. And you can also see the video of this podcast. Also, check us out on social media at Movies by McManus. I'm your host, Greg. I'm with my brother, Mike.
Thank you very much. This was a fun one, and we'll see you soon.
We'll see you soon. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.